Good afternoon. Welcome to our Thursday afternoon Colloquium series. It's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Farzam Toudeh-Fallah. He is Director of Quantum Communications R&D at Ciena Corporation, which is a major telecom equipment manufacturer. Farzam got his PhD from MIT, and he has been active in quantum communications, quantum secure channels, quantum networks, with emphasis on taking a pragmatic approach towards developing these technologies for the real world environment. He's going to tell us about his work today. Please.
Thank you for the introduction. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be here and presenting at the prestigious Wyant College of Optical Sciences, University of Arizona. What I'm going to discuss in this presentation is our pragmatic perspective on establishing long-distance quantum communication channels. In order to do so, first, I'm going to provide an introduction to Ciena and our engagement in the quantum communication space, and why long-distance quantum communication is an important area of research for us. Then I will discuss the long-distance quantum communication challenge, and we propose a series of a set of requirements for deployment of such channels in a real-world operational environments. I would like to emphasize on that 4 words, real-world operational environments. These 4 words will constitute the foundation of my presentation here. You'll see me during the presentation. I keep bringing examples and data from the real world in order to support what I'm discussing here. Once I establish this foundation, then I will move on and discuss the 2 different approaches we're exploring towards establishing these channels, i.e. terrestrial and satellite-based. Ciena is a pioneer in advancing communication systems. The best examples of which is our latest processor, WaveLogic 6, which we introduced last year and is able to establish 1.6 terabits per second on a single wave on optical fiber, which is a world record. As such, we believe that quantum communication is a new frontier for us that we should get engaged in. And we have been engaged in this area for years now. Now, I mentioned about quantum communication, so let me just briefly provide a high-level understanding of quantum communication. So under the umbrella of quantum technologies, there are 3 main areas: quantum computing, quantum communication, and quantum sensing. Quantum communication is generally, or at a very high level, is defined as faithful transfer of an unknown quantum state. In other words, the goal here is to transfer an unknown quantum state from point A to point B intact. The reason is that quantum states are very fragile, and once they come in contact with the environment, they will either get modified, they go into decoherent states, or they get completely lost during the while propagating in the propagation media. Now, under the quantum communication, there are different types of applications. There is a distributed quantum computing, which is basically interconnecting these quantum processors or quantum computers, if you will. Quantum key distribution, which is utilized to establish highly secured data communication links. And then distributed quantum sensing, which is used to interconnect quantum sensors. Now, at Ciena, our focus is on quantum key distribution to establish a quantum secure channel that I'm going to discuss later on. Due to the importance of this field, quantum communication, there has been several initiatives already launched around the world. I'm going to mention two of them here. So in June of 2019, European Quantum Communication Infrastructure, or EuroQCI, was launched. And in July of 2020, US National Quantum Internet Initiative was established. And I had the honor of working with 38 other scientists to co-author the roadmap for Quantum Interconnects, which is available at the internet site of the US Department of Energy. So, as I pointed out, we are already engaged in quantum communication space. We have a dedicated quantum communication team, and we are partners with different manufacturers of the QKD systems, and we are engaged with our customers to understand their needs in terms of establishing quantum secure channels and working with them. And we have conducted several proof of concepts and demonstrations in this area. In terms of the R&D activities in the area of quantum communication, as I pointed out, our emphasis is on establishing quantum secured communications. I can break down our activities into two distinct areas. The first area covers short distance. That would cover up to about 100 kilometers, which is a metro environment. As depicted in this figure on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, in order to establish a quantum secure channel, I'm going to discuss it at a very high level. We have two QKD, or quantum key distribution systems. These two systems establish what is known as the quantum channel and service channel among themselves. By utilizing these two channels, they generate the same secret keys. So once they generate the shared secret keys among themselves, then we have two encryptors that are co-located with the QKD systems. Then these encryptors basically establish an API, which is mostly ETSI API, according to the ETSI standards. And using these APIs, these encryptors receive the keys from these QKD boxes. And at that point, they use the same secret keys to encrypt the channels between them, the data channels between them. At this point, the data channel is called quantum secured channel. Why? Because it is secured based on the principles of quantum mechanics and not by algorithms. So, as an example of these encryptors, I have specified Wave Server. That's a Ciena product, which is able to establish 800 gigabits per second quantum secure channel at the optical layer, or OTN-SEC layer. And very soon, we're going to increase that to 1.6 terabits per second. In terms of our R&D activities in short distance quantum secure channels, we conduct performance characterization of quantum channel, especially in the coexistence mode, when quantum channel and coherent DWDM channels are multiplexed on the same fiber, because that is what is more appealing to network operators. And I'm going to discuss it later on why. And then, as I pointed out, we have partnerships with different QKD system manufacturers to work with them toward establishing these quantum secure channels. And the goal here is to deliver a joint quantum DWDM solution to our customers. So I mentioned about the proof of concepts and demos that we have conducted. This is an example that we conducted back at the OFC 2024. As depicted in this figure, in this demo, we basically paired up Ciena's Wave Server with a Toshiba QKD system. Using this methodology, the two Ciena Wave Servers on both sides of the exhibition floor, they were able to establish 800 gigabits per second OTN-SEC channel between themselves. We also use another Ciena product, Ciena 8140, which is a routing and switching product. And we paired it up with an ID Quantic QKD system. Using this methodology, the Ciena 8140 the two Ciena 8140s on both sides of the exhibition floor were able to establish 400 gigabits per second quantum secure channel at the MACsec layer. Then that 400 gig quantum secured MACsec channel was fed into the wave server, which took that and multiplexed it into that 800 gig OTN-sec quantum secure channel and sent it to the other side of the exhibition floor. And then obviously we reverse process and basically establish a quantum secure channel end to end. Now, let me mention that in today's QKD systems have a maximum distance of about 100 kilometers, more or less. And I'm talking about the QKD systems that are deployable in the field. Now, in the lab or let's say in academic institutions, you might have heard of larger distances. But what is deployable in the field is about 100 kilometers, and that's because of the exponential loss in the optical fiber. So when these channels are launched based on encoding single photons. So one single photon at a time is encoded according to the specific quantum state. So each photon is carrying a specific quantum state, which is in superposition state. Now, obviously, the question is, for our network operators, how can we go beyond 100 kilometers? Because there are circumstances where you need to quantum secure a link that might be thousands of kilometers in distance. For instance, if you want to connect two data centers that are, let's say, cross-country. So for them, today, there is a solution, and that solution is called trusted node. So as specified right in the middle of this figure, in the trusted node environment, two QKD systems are placed back to back, as depicted here. The first QKD system receives a session key over the secure quantum channel. And then once it receives that key, then it converts the key from quantum to digital and then passes to the second QKD system. Then the second QKD system, in turn, will convert that key from digital back to quantum and send it over a quantum secure channel to the QKD device at the far end. So using this methodology, we can extend the reach of the QKD channels. And using this methodology, we can go for thousands of kilometers. However, there is a catch. The catch is that according to the quantum key distribution methodology, the key is safe as long as you can keep it in the quantum channel. Now, here, as soon as the key is converted from quantum to digital in order to be passed to the second QKD, right at that moment is vulnerable to an eavesdropper. Now, some operators are happy with this methodology, with the trusted node, some are not. For those who are not, we are actually working on establishing end-to-end long-distance quantum communication channel. Hence, our interest in this area of research. So, with that background, let me talk about some of the challenges that we are facing in establishing long-distance quantum communication channels today. In order to do that, let me first discuss the optical communication link. In an optical communication link that you're all familiar with today, we have two sites, site A and site B. And these might be thousands of kilometers apart. We break down that long distance into shorter spans. Each span could be about 80 to 100 kilometers. And each span is a short span connected to the next one via an optical amplifier. Now, in each optical amplifier is placed into these sites. We call them ILA sites. ILA stands for inline amplification. So inline amplification sites, every about 80 to 100 kilometers. Now, let's take a look at the functionality of an optical amplifier. What does it do? It takes one photon multiplied by n, so we have one photon in, n photons out. However, due to the no cloning principle in quantum mechanics, an unknown quantum state cannot be duplicated. Therefore, based on that principle, the entire notion of amplification doesn't even exist in quantum communication. So the question is, what do we do? So this is the equivalent of an optical communication link in quantum space. This is a quantum communication link. So again, in the quantum communication link, we have two sites, site A and site B, that might be thousands of kilometers apart. And then we break it down into shorter spans. Each span is specified by epsilon, which is a quantum channel. And each span is connected to the next via a device called quantum repeater, specified by the letter epsilon. I'm sorry, psi. Okay. Now, this is where we basically set our first or impose our first requirement for establishing long-distance quantum communication channels. The first requirement is the coexistence requirement. In other words, the quantum communication links must be deployed on the same infrastructure that is in deployment today. Okay? So that infrastructure consists of optical fibers and the ILA sites that we use today. Why? Because it is an extremely expensive proposition for the operators to basically rip apart whatever they have spent billions of dollars on and install new quantum communication link. So they must use the same infrastructure. That's the first and foremost fundamental requirement for deploying the long-distance quantum communication link in real-world environments. Now, I mentioned about, we're all familiar with optical fiber, but what about these ILA sites that I talked about? Let's take a look at them, because as I said, quantum repeaters must be deployed in the same ILA site. So these are some of the examples of the ILA sites. These are usually about 10 to 15 feet in dimension, extremely limited in both power and space they can provide. And the best they can do in terms of temperature control is some kind of air conditioning, and that's it. So space is extremely limited. The power they can provide to the telecom equipment, extremely limited. And this is where the quantum repeaters must be deployed. Sometimes these ILA sites could be in the middle of nowhere. They could be along railroad tracks in Texas or in the middle of a desert in Australia. So these quantum repeaters should be deployed, should be developed such that we can deploy them in any kind of conditions. Okay? Now, that was just half the story. It even gets worse when we consider submarine cables. So in a submarine cable, basically, we launch the optical channels into the submarine cables. And these cables can go way beyond 10,000 kilometers in length. So these submarine cables are supported by what is known as the submarine repeater. These repeaters are about 20 centimeters in diameter and about a meter in length. Now imagine if we want to place a quantum repeater, optical amplifier, ROADMs, and who knows what into this tiny, cramped space. Okay. Now, in terms of these optical submarine cables, I don't know the exact numbers, but somewhere between 95 to 99% of the world traffic is passed through these cables. So these are very critical path for interconnecting the world. Now, let me give you an example. Recently, using our WaveLogic 6, our modem was able to launch 1 terabits per second optical channel on a 13,500 kilometer submarine cable that connects Los Angeles to Melbourne. Melbourne, Australia. You can see it kind of here, this red link. That's the submarine cable at 13,500 kilometers. So now the question for us is, how can we quantum secure such a massive channel in both the capacity 1 terabits per second, just single wave, imagine that, over 13,500 kilometers. So these are some of the questions that we need to answer. So based on what I've described so far, these are some of the requirements that we are basically imposing on the development of quantum repeaters. First of all, as I pointed out, they should be deployable on existing networks, which means in terms of the fiber optic medium, they must operate in coexistence mode. So quantum and DWDM data channels must be launched on the same fiber. We cannot have quantum channel running on a dedicated fiber. It's not economically viable. Operators don't like it. So how do we do that? In this scenario, data channels, optical data channels are already running on C. And matter of fact, at this point, we are running on C+L because most of our customers have already exhausted C-band. C-band is completely full. And they are now moving towards L-band. So C+L is the one that our customers are now using and our systems can provide. So that's the first requirement. Quantum channel on O-band, data channel on C+L band. They must be multiplexed on the same fiber. Also, all degradation factors in real-world environments must be considered. So I'm going to discuss about this later on. In terms of quantum repeaters, they should be able to support at least 100 kilometer spacing between them. That's a very important requirement. Where is it coming from? From the ILA sites. As I pointed out, the ILA sites, the spacing between them can go anywhere between 80 to 100 kilometers. So these quantum repeaters should be able to meet that requirement of maximum 100 kilometers. They can even go beyond that, but for now, we're talking 100 kilometers. Also, no dedicated sites for quantum channels. I have seen solutions by whether academia or industry which propose to have a site right in the middle. So we call these two sites, Alice and Bob, that are trying to establish this quantum channel. And they're talking about a Charlie in the middle. That is absolutely a no-go. We cannot proceed with a third site, no Charlie. Why? Because again, in the real world, we cannot go and ask an operator to build a site right in the middle of that 800 kilometer fiber, because it's not possible. Also, as I pointed out, ILAs are extremely limited in providing power and space. So we have to, when these quantum repeaters should be able to be placed inside those racks inside the ILAs and tolerate whatever power that the ILA site can provide them. And the last but not least, absolutely no cryogenic environment. Now, I'm going to discuss later on the quantum repeaters. Most of the approaches use what is known as quantum memory, and quantum memories usually these days in the labs, they operate in they require cryogenic environment. But unfortunately, no cryogenic environment at all. Imagine in those tiny ILAs, somebody expects us to have cryogenic environment. Absolutely no go. So, and instead, we are imposing at least 40 degrees centigrade ambient temperature tolerance for these quantum repeaters. So these are a list of requirements that we are calling for with regard to development of quantum repeaters to be deployed on the real-world environment. So now that I provided you with some background and some foundations, let me discuss the two distinct approaches we are taking at Ciena towards conducting research in establishing these long-distance quantum communication channels, i.e. Terrestrial and satellite-based. So in terms of the terrestrial, this is Ciena's vision in establishing large-scale quantum optical networks. These networks will be able to establish end-to-end quantum secure channels. So as depicted here, these sites could be thousands of kilometers apart. And based on what I described before, first of all, in this vision, the quantum and optical channels are multiplexed together and launched into the fiber. Once they hit one of these devices that we designate as quantum optical repeater system, or QRS, then the optical and quantum channels are demultiplexed. Optical channel will be routed over an optical element, and then quantum channel will be routed over a quantum repeater. We mux them back, send them over the fiber and to the rest of the network. Now, the optical element could be a ROADM, could be an amplifier or a switch. We are very well familiar with that. We know how to build them. We've been designing, manufacturing them for decades. So no problem there. Obviously, what we need to concentrate on is the quantum communication channel. So let's discuss that. In terms of modeling the quantum communication channel, based on the Stein-Spring dilation model, we can model a quantum communication channel in an optical fiber using a Gaussian transformation of a joint system and the environment. And this Gaussian transformation is represented by a bosonic quadratic Hamiltonian in field operators, as specified here. And then one can proceed towards deriving the associated operator sum model of this quantum communication channel based on cross operators. Okay? Up to this point, it is fine with us. The problem starts right here. When researchers try to adapt this model to the real world optical fiber. And in that adaptation model, they consider optical fiber solely as a lossy medium. This is incomplete. This model is incomplete. So what we are proposing is that in addition to loss, other degradation factors must be taken into account when we model a quantum channel propagating through a fiber, including SOP fluctuations, dispersion, nonlinear effects, and Raman scattering, which are especially important in coexistence mode. And that's the mode that I talked about as a requirement. Let me give an example. Our measurements in the field has shown that optical fibers can suffer upwards of 3 to 4 megarads per second SOP fluctuations. So that's where this state of polarization on the Poincare spheres fluctuates. This happens when optical fiber is installed in aerial format in something called OPGW, kind of an armor. So every time a lightning hits, although it's only a few milliseconds, what happens is that it would generate a massive SOP fluctuations on the order of megarads per second. This is huge fluctuations. Now, or another example, usually in the United States, optical fibers are basically installed along the railroad tracks. Now, every time a train passes by, it generates SOP fluctuations on the order of somewhere between 10 to 20 kilorads per second. And that's constant. So I don't know how long it takes, 4 or 5 minutes for a train to pass by. During that 4 to 5 minutes, you have constant 10 to 20 kilorads per second SOP fluctuations. Therefore, these are the effects that we have to be very careful about. Now, my recommendation is to stay away from polarization, period. Whether you encode your single photon in polarization states or in superposition state, or you launch entangled states in a polarization format. Stay away from polarization. Unless you can control your polarization upwards of 3, 4, 5 megarads per second. Today, our systems can tolerate this. Our systems can tolerate polarization, SOP fluctuations in the order of megarads per second. But we don't know whether it could be done at single photon layer. Okay? So that's major difference between optical communication. When you have a pulse, has enough power to propagate through the fiber and we can control the polarization versus a single photon that is propagating through the fiber. Okay? So that's as far as the fiber consideration goes. Now, with regard to quantum repeater, the methodology that we are considering is entanglement distribution based. In this methodology, the two long distance sites, site A and site B, basically are, again, the long distance between them is broken down into multiple shorter spans, and each span is connected to the next via an quantum repeater. Now, each quantum repeater will establish an entanglement with its own neighbors. So entanglement is a non-local correlation between two particles. It could be multipartite, it could be bipartite, multipartite, and so on. So, I mean, there's no time for me to explain the entanglement, but I refer you to the literature and books and texts on the internet. So basically, each quantum repeater establishes entanglement with its own neighbor. Once it's done, then all of them go through a process called entanglement swapping. Once this process is done, then at the end of this process, site A and site B will be in entanglement. Please notice that when we started this process, site A was not in entanglement with site B. Okay? Now, once site A is entanglement with site B, then we can use quantum teleportation, which is another methodology in quantum communication, to teleport the quantum state from site A to site B. Now, for us at Ciena, because our focus is on establishing long-distance quantum secure channels, we have another route to take. And that is utilizing native QKD protocols, such as E91 and BBM92. So we have both methodologies available to us. But the point is that we have to establish entanglement between the two long-distance sites. Entanglement will act as a bridge over which we can transfer the quantum states. Now, this methodology, in this methodology, it really doesn't matter what the application is. It might be distributed quantum computing, it might be distributed or establishing quantum secure channels, doesn't matter. In both applications, all you need to do is transfer quantum states from site A to site B. So this is applicable to both. However, as I said, for us, who is working in security space, we have another recourse, which is using E91 or BBM92. However, we are very well aware of the challenges that we are facing in developing these systems. The first one is quantum memory, and that's developing those memories that can maintain a quantum state and with long coherence time. These are required for all these quantum repeaters to go through that quantum entanglement swapping process. The next one is coupling efficiency between bosonic and fermionic states, and then achieving high fidelity and achieving a high entanglement generation rate. So these are some of the challenges that we are facing in developing this system. The entire research community is facing in developing these quantum repeaters today. We are very well aware of that. Now, there is another approach for developing quantum computers. So some researchers basically are proposing another approach called one-way quantum repeaters. In this approach, basically the quantum state is encoded using quantum error correction codes, and then is propagated through this quantum channel. Once they hit one of these quantum repeaters, the quantum repeaters will use quantum error correction to correct for both link loss and operational errors. Okay? Well, in theory, it looks very attractive because using this methodology, there's no need for quantum memory. It's one way. So as the photons propagate through this, they will get corrected and move forward to the destination. Also, there's no need for two-way classical communication that is required in the previous methodology. So in theory, very nice, very appealing. However, this methodology suffers from a major setback that makes it impossible to deploy on real-world environments. And that issue is the 3 dB loss tolerance threshold. It turns out that these one-way quantum repeaters cannot tolerate more than 3 dB loss on the link. Okay? So if I translate this 3 dB loss on an NDSF fiber, that would translate into 15 kilometer on C-band, or even worse, 8.6 kilometer on O-band. Quantum repeater spacing, and that's it. If you remember, I said one of the major requirements is at least 100 kilometer spacing between the quantum repeaters. So 8.6 kilometer on O-band, is absolutely no-go for us. Therefore, this methodology is unacceptable for us. Now, let me give you an example. You might say, why I'm emphasizing so much on this loss and this requirement. Let me, again, from the real world, let me give you an example. This is an example of a real-world link between Chicago and New York. So this optical communication link runs on 2,600 kilometers of fiber and consists of 31 ILA sites. Okay, so let's take a look at the loss on each span. We can see the loss can go upwards of 22 dB. Okay, easy. Now, that's just in C-band. As I said, we are not interested in launching quantum channel on C-band. We want to launch quantum channel on O-band. So if we translate this to O-band, this is it. We can see it can go upwards of 42 dB loss per span. Okay, so that's why tolerating this much loss is critical for a quantum repeater. And one-way quantum repeaters can only tolerate 3 dB of loss. So there's absolutely no go. Now, let me just mention that we have also conducted some research at Ciena on the required security rate for QKD systems. And we have basically based on this research, we have found out that aggregating optical channels to higher data rate channels will definitely decrease the required security rate. Okay, and that would be even more pronounced if we move to C plus L band. So the blue one shows the C band, and the red one is C plus L band. So this would basically decrease the pressure on the quantum channel to generate more and more keys for us. If we can aggregate from, let's say, 100 gig channels to 200 to 400 and now 800. And as I pointed out, today we can offer up to 1.6 terabits per second. And it is published on archives. Now, what I described here in terms of developing quantum repeaters, that entanglement distribution methodology is extremely complex. As I pointed out, challenges are abound, and researchers are working worldwide on addressing these channels. Based on what we see taking place now, we don't think that we're going to have a quantum repeater that we can deploy on real-world environment anytime soon. So our time horizon is somewhere at least 10 plus years. So that's why in parallel, we are pursuing another approach, and that's satellite-based. In satellite-based, there are two different approaches. In the first approach, a satellite in space establishes a quantum channel with a quantum ground station. And using this channel, it establishes the same secret key with the first ground station. Then it moves over to the second ground station and establishes a secure channel with the second ground station and transfers that same secret key to the second ground station. At this point, the two ground stations have the same secret key, and they use that key to establish a quantum optical channels between them over the fiber. Okay? This might be thousands of kilometers apart. In the second approach, a satellite in space basically establishes two quantum channels with the two ground stations simultaneously. And using that, it basically, all the satellite does in this scenario is just generating entangled photon pairs and sending these pairs down. Okay? Once these two ground stations receive those entangled pairs, then they are in entanglement with each other. And they can use, again, quantum teleportation to transport the quantum states over, and establish a quantum secure channels between themselves. Okay. Each one of these methodology has its own advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, there's always a trade-off in any methodology. In the first approach, this satellite, as I pointed out, establishes the key between itself and a ground station. So in this approach, the satellite is the owner of the key. Satellite knows the key. It's carrying the key over to the next one, over to the next ground station. So the question is, what if the satellite is compromised? Okay, so you need to trust the satellite. In other words, so that's why this methodology is called trusted satellite model. Okay, well, so that's the disadvantage. What's the advantage? The two ground stations could be fall apart. It could be thousands of kilometers apart. It doesn't matter. Now, in the second approach, as I said, satellite is basically just a dumb platform in space, and all it does is just generating these photon pairs. That's it. It doesn't know anything about keys. Okay, interesting approach. In that case, you don't have to trust the satellite. However, the disadvantage is that in this methodology, the satellite must establish quantum channels with both ground stations simultaneously. So, and given the fact that these satellites are usually in the LEO state, at least currently, that would give us a very, very short window during which the satellite is in the field of view of both ground stations. Very, very short. And also the entanglement generation rate is low at this point. So these are advantages and disadvantages of each method. Now, as I pointed out, we are pursuing the satellite quantum communication route. And for that, we are a member of the Quantum Encryption and Science Satellite, or QSAT in brief. That is a research project conducted or sponsored by the Canadian Space Agency and is administered by the Institute for Quantum Computing at the University of Waterloo. We are a member of a user consortium consisting of 11 academic institutions, industry partners, and obviously the government agencies in Canada. As depicted in this figure, Ciena has a very specific role to play in this project. Our role is to basically establish quantum secure channel between the two ground stations over an optical fiber. How it's done is that, if you remember, I talked about our Ciena wave server, which can establish 800 gigabits per second quantum secure channel at the optical layer. So the plan is to deploy our servers into these, wave servers into these ground stations. And then the wave server will open an HC API channel with a quantum transmitter receiver system. This system is the one that establishes the key with the satellite. Okay? And using this methodology, the two wave servers on the two ground stations will receive the same secret key, and using those keys, they establish quantum secure channels on an optical fiber between them. Our goal in terms of engaging in this project is to understand how we can interact with the satellite to establish quantum secure channel. And the reason is that, basically, interacting with the satellite is a bit stochastic process, because we don't know if a satellite, for instance, passes over the first ground station and is covered with clouds. In that case, we can't generate any keys. It has to pass over. Okay. So the question is, how do we work with the satellite in such an environment? What kind of a secure key rate generation can we expect from the satellite? How often can we refresh the key? These are all the questions that we are trying to find answers to by basically joining this project. Also, at the end of this 5-year research project, we try to conduct not only a technological viability study, but also an economic one, right? Even if technologically it is a viable solution for establishing long-distance quantum secure channels, then we have to see, is it really economically viable? How much is going to cost to launch a satellite, to build a satellite, to launch it, and then to control the satellite? So these are all the questions that we are trying to figure out before we can make a decision as to we can use the satellite for establishing long-distance quantum secure channel. Specifically, we are considering the satellite solution for establishing quantum secure channels over submarine cables. As you remember, I talked about submarine cables at 13,000 kilometers. Okay, I don't believe we can have quantum repeaters that we can install under the ocean, at the bottom of the ocean, at 13,000 kilometers, and putting them in those tiny capsules at the bottom of the ocean anytime soon. But using this methodology, we believe it is at least technologically viable, but we have to, again, go through the research and try to figure out whether it is economically viable. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my presentation with some closing remarks. First of all, I discussed the challenges associated with establishing long-distance quantum communication channels. And we propose a series of requirements for establishing these channels in real-world operational environments. Again, I would like to emphasize on these 4 words, real-world operational environments. I also talked about the limitations of quantum channel models and also the limitations that are faced by quantum repeaters today and the challenges that needs to be addressed. Especially I talked about that 3 dB link loss tolerant threshold and other limitations. And I provided Ciena's vision on establishing large-scale quantum optical networks, which are capable of supporting end-to-end quantum secured channels. We have published our vision, and it's on archives. I also talked about our engagement in the satellite quantum communication research and towards establishing long-distance quantum secured optical channels and why we are engaged in this research project. And at the end, I would like to mention that we welcome collaboration with academia and industry towards developing pragmatic solutions for establishing long-distance quantum communication systems. So with that, I would like to wrap it up. And my sincere thanks to Professor Mansourian and Professor So for their invitation to speak at this forum. Thank you so much.
Questions? Yes. Yes.
You're talking about the protocol that you use a satellite. I just wonder there are 2 concerns. That's first of all, as you said about the photon, the source. I don't know what kind of source that you use because it is like, is it probabilistic, source that you're going to use? And second things is like the receiver. So what kind of receiver do you planning? Because the channel is a lossy bosonic channel, right? So that's also, I think, is another challenges, right?
Yes. So with regard to the transmitter and receiver, obviously there are different methodologies to generate single photons. For instance, microring resonators is one approach. Spontaneous parametric down conversion is another one, or spontaneous 4-wave mixing is another one to generate all these different states. So that's a part of the research that we are conducting. As I pointed out, we are a part of a consortium of 11 academic institutions, industry partners, and each one of us is working on that. So this is work in progress. So for instance, one of the issues in satellite quantum communication is turbulence in the atmosphere, right? And one of the academic institutions engaged in this project is working on adaptive optics to basically compensate for that, right? Now, the challenge is that these channels are extremely weak. So we have to make sure that we can compensate, very well. Of course, they have a different source just to propagate through the atmosphere, to probe the atmosphere for adaptive optics. Matter of fact, there will be, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they're going to use 2 telescopes. So one dedicated to the quantum channel, and the other one is for monitoring the atmosphere, and also establishing some classical channels between the ground station and the satellite. So the same thing goes for receivers. Obviously, the I mean, the best choice would be SNSPDs, as the receivers. But the SNSPDs require, as you know, they require cryogenic environments. So for those receivers that are in the ground station, that's fine. But for those receivers that are on board the satellite, it would be challenging. So we need to develop receivers that don't require cryogenic environments, or they can tolerate radiation in space. So we are dealing with very, very tight set of requirements for satellite. But again, this is research in progress. Sure.
So we obviously have communication, secure communication today, classical communication, coding. Only problem is that if someday quantum computers come along and they can decode this secure codes, then we will be in trouble. So what is the problem with secure communication as exists today? Why do we need quantum encryption?
Yes. So the way the channels are encrypted today has two parts. Number one is the encryption methodology. And the other one is key distribution, because the two parties need to have the same secret key to encode the channel, right? Well, it turns out that the calculations I myself have done the calculation. It shows that in terms of the encryption itself, encryption methodology, AES-256 will be safe against the threat posed by quantum computers. And that's the way, because the way that quantum computers operate, which is the quadratic speedup as opposed to exponential speedup. So, but the problem is key distribution. All the key distribution methodologies that we use today, such as RSA or ECC or Diffie-Hellman, it turns out that they will all be vulnerable to the threat posed by quantum computers. So quantum computers using algorithms such as Shor algorithm and Grover algorithm, they will be able to break all of them. So what quantum computers are able to do is not breaking the actual encryption, but actually breaking the key distribution mechanism. And once you have the key, it doesn't matter how strong your encryption mechanism is. That's it. As if you're giving the key to your vault to somebody. It doesn't matter how strong the wall, the walls are. People can easily get in. So that's why the whole point in quantum key distribution is protecting the key. And it turns out that based on this methodology, quantum key distribution, which is based on two principles of quantum mechanics, measurement principle and no-crowning principle, it would be able to protect the key distribution in the sense that if somebody tries to eavesdrop on that key distribution, both parties, Alice and Bob, will immediately know that somebody is listening to the link, and they will drop that communication key distribution, and they will basically throw away that key because they know that key is compromised. So that's how it's done.
Until the quantum computers come along, the key distribution as it is done today is secure.
Well, that's an interesting question you brought up, because you see, the problem is not how long it takes for quantum computers to be able to break the key. It might be 10 years. I mean, there are difference of opinions out there. Some people believe in 10 years. Some people say 20 years. Some people even 30 years. But the problem is that the threat is imminent, in a sense that the adversary is currently today listening to all our communications, and they are recording all these communications. And then they wait 10 years, 20 years, whatever it takes. Once the quantum computers are able to break these codes, then they can see all these secrets. Now, there are some, I mean, if you buy something online, who cares, 10 years from now, what credit card you use. But there are some secrets that must stay secret for years to come, or even forever. For those institutions, then this methodology, this threat is imminent. So that's why we are basically advising our customers to deploy this quantum secure channels today. Don't wait for tomorrow.
The way our defense secretary is communicating these things People already know the signals. I don't know about that.
It's actually just wanted to clarify on Masood's point. So let's say quantum computers are not going to exist for 100 years. Are we safe now? Because my understanding is even the classical key distribution, it's a matter of computation, right? So if you have enough resources, you can break that distribution network too. Not the encryption part, I'm just talking about the distribution part.
You mean the key
Key
distribution?
distribution.
Using what methodology, I'm sorry?
So basically by brute force computation, right? I mean, if you have a 256-bit key or 1024-bit key or even longer keys,
Well,
is that not?
you see, it depends. There was a paper was published a few years back. I think it was by researchers at Google and a Swedish institution. If I recall correctly, they showed that with today's computers, I'm talking about supercomputers, it would take either a billion or a trillion years to break a 2048-bit RSA key. But they showed that with a quantum computer, if it is powerful enough, it could be broken in 8 hours. So that shows, the dramatic, change or difference between the power of quantum computers versus today's classical computers, even supercomputers. Just compare 8 hours with a billion years. So if without quantum computers, today's the key distribution appears to be safe at least.
And is that the majority of the communications done with 2048?
No, there could be different methodologies. There's RSA, there's Diffie-Hellman, there's ECC. So, and then there are different versions of ECC. No. But point is that research has shown that all of them will be broken. Yeah. So, because it's either based on, figure out the prime numbers that were used to basically come up with that, RSA 24-bit, or other methodologies. And all of them will be broken using, they started with Shor algorithm and Grover algorithm, but now they have moved on to many other algorithms. If you take a look at for instance, the Google paper, you'll see that they keep developing these algorithms, and they can show that it can be broken. Quantum computers can easily. Yes, go ahead.
So when you say that AES 256 is still safe for quantum computers, what type of quantum computer are we talking about? Is this a fault tolerant system or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because to my knowledge, that's not quite correct, that you can still break 256. Might take longer, but you can still brute force the key.
Well, I'm talking about brute force.
Mm.
I'm talking about brute force. If you brute force, see, for instance, research shows that if you brute force, I think an AES 128, it is vulnerable. It could be broken in hours. But if you go with AES 256, that is a different story. So I specifically mentioned AES 256, not all AES. Yes.
So I assume that breaking system with a longer key costs more. How does the size of the quantum computer scale with the size of the key I need to?
Well, I'm not an expert in quantum computing, so I can't really address that question. I'm sorry. I'm not an expert in either security or quantum computing, but I'm trying to address some of the questions. But my field is quantum communication. So as to how exactly quantum computers scale with key size, I'm sorry, I can't address that question.
Basically, the question is, if we have quantum computers at a certain level, why don't we just make keys 1,000 times longer? And we're sorry, we'll just run out with money.
You mean in terms of the key length? Or?
Yes.
That's a security question as to whether, because you see, the longer the key is, the more overhead you have to do, in order to distribute the key. Because we have to distribute the key. It's not as if we basically distribute a single key and that's it, and we're going to use it for the entire week or month. No. We keep refreshing the keys, and this requires overhead, right? So the longer the key is, the longer it takes a lot of overhead. and resources to basically refresh the key. So again, I'm not a security expert, but I believe that might be the case as to why we're not going to hire one, or whether your quantum computers will be able to break any key length. I can't answer that question.
Any other questions?
Not, let's thank Farzam one more time.
Thank you.